Dear students and my teacher friends, Namaskar. I welcome you to the presentation lecture on ventricles of the brain. Now, here in this lecture, what we are going to discuss, learning objective of this lecture. So, here in this lecture, we are going to discuss about the anatomy and the location of the ventricle, where exactly in our brain the ventricles are present, and also we are going to discuss about the anatomy of the ventricles. Now, before we start this lecture, I would like to show you this figure. This figure is showing the brain ventricle. So you observe this figure and read all the names. Okay. So now we are starting this. Starting with the first point, ventricle. Now what is the meaning of ventricle? So ventricle means little cavity. Ventricles are cavities or expansion which are present in our brain. Okay, and this ventricle they originate, they develop from neural canal. Neural canal is the lumen of embryonic neural tube. So from neural canal, this ventricle they develop. So in the figure I am showing you, for example, in this figure, see table 13.1, major brain structure, embryonic through adult stage. So this table is showing the development of human brain, and in the first column, as you can see, the neural tube is shown, then primary brain vesicle are shown, then secondary brain vesicle, and the neural canal derivative, and finally the structure within the brain region. Now see here neural tube, and as the embryonic development is going on, then from neural tube the primary brain vesicle develop, pro procephalon, that is the forebrain, mesencephalon, and rhombocephalon hindbrain. Then further development, secondary brain vesicle develop, telencephalon, diencephalon, mesencephalon, metencephalon, mesencephalon, then neural canal derivatives. Okay, here you can see this is the neural canal and neural canal derivatives. So ventricles are originating from the ventricles are developing from this neural canal. So lateral ventricle, where it is present, third ventricle, diencephalon, cerebral aqueduct, mesencephalon, fourth ventricle, metencephalon, fourth ventricle, diencephalon, and here finally in last column the structure within the brain region. Okay, cerebrum, hypothalamus, thalamus, hypothalamus, then mind, midbrain. Okay, mesencephalon, then metencephalon, pons, cerebrum, diencephalon, medulla oblongata. This way you can understand this table. Okay, one more table for human brain development I would like to show you. For example, in this table, see first column they are showing the neural tube. Okay, second, see, and the time period is also written. So in first column the neural tube is the 4-week old embryo. Okay, and then it is subdividing into primary brain vesicle. Okay, then from primary brain vesicle, the secondary brain vesicle developed by 5th week. Okay, so these are the secondary brain vesicle, and finally the adult brain structure develops. Okay, so this way you can understand this table, and you see where the ventricles are present. Okay, so telencephalon, lateral ventricle, diencephalon, third ventricle, mesencephalon. So mesencephalon, brain structure, brainstem, midbrain, cerebral aqueduct there is present, metencephalon, okay, brainstem. Then cerebrum is present between metencephalon, mesencephalon, fourth ventricle, okay, and spinal cord, central canal. So you can understand this table, okay. So neural canal, you see the blue color portion in the center. From that, the ventricle and the central canal develops. Okay. Now the second point. See, all the ventricle, they are lined inside by ependymal cell, and this ventricle, they are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. So in the cavity of the ventricle, cerebrospinal fluid is present. Now all the ventricles, they are connected to each other, and all the ventricle, they are also connected with the central canal, which is present in the spinal cord. So all four ventricles, they are connecting with the central canal of the spinal cord, and at the same time they are connected to each other also. So here, you in the figure, you see that, you see this, these are the lateral ventricle, they are showing this one and this one, lateral ventricle. And here we can see a lateral ventricle connects with the third ventricle. So this is the third ventricle, and here the fourth ventricle. So third ventricle connects with the fourth ventricle, and fourth ventricle finally merge with the central canal. This is the central canal of spinal cord. Okay, so all the ventricle, and here also in this figure, see, lateral ventricle, then third ventricle, the fourth ventricle, and finally central canal of spinal cord. Okay. Okay, the fourth point. Now this is also this figure, ventricles of the brain. Okay. Okay, the fourth point. See, how many ventricles are there in our brain? So in our brain, there are present four ventricle, two lateral ventricle, where these lateral ventricles are located. So ventral, sorry, this two lateral ventricle, they are present in the cerebrum. Okay. So in the figure, let's say this, for example, this is the cross section of our brain, and here you can see the lateral ventricle. Okay. Lateral ventricle, lateral ventricle. Okay. Now between these two lateral ventricle, they are separated by a thin medial partition. Two lateral ventricle, they are separated by a thin medial partition that is known as septum pellucidum. Pellucid means transparent. So I am showing you this. Okay, for example, here this one is the lateral ventricle, this one is the lateral ventricle, and in between septum pellucidum. So this one is the septum pellucidum. Okay. In this figure also. Okay. lateral ventricle, lateral ventricle, and this one, this one. Okay. Between this two lateral ventricle, septum, pellucidum is present. Okay, so you see this figure. Okay. Now the fifth point. Okay, before we discuss the fifth point, you observe this figure also. Now here one more table, same table. This table also showing the development of the brain, so you can have a brief idea about the development of brain. Even though this topic is not there in your syllabus, but you need to have a brief idea about the development of the brain. Here in this figure also you see lateral ventricles are shown, so lateral ventricle and septum pellucidum. Now in this figure, see pattern of distribution of gray matter and white matter. Okay, so just you go through this figure and you will have idea about the arrangement of gray matter and white matter in our brain and also in the spinal cord. Okay, brainstem also. Okay, now the fifth point we are discussing. See, in the fifth point, within the diencephalon, smaller thinner ventricle is present, which is known as third ventricle. So in the diencephalon, small thin ventricle is present and known as third ventricle. So third ventricle, this is the third ventricle, this one is the third ventricle. Okay, now the sixth point. See, in the sixth point, each lateral ventricle is connected with the third ventricle through an opening called the interventricular foramen. So this one is the lateral ventricle, this one is the lateral ventricle. Both this lateral ventricle, they are connecting with the this one is the third ventricle, and lateral ventricle connect with the third ventricle by interventricular foramen. So see, interventricular foramen, this one is the interventricular foramen. Here also in this figure, okay, this is lateral ventricle, this one is lateral ventricle, and this part, okay, interventricular foramen. Now the seventh point. Now in the seventh point we are discussing about cerebral aqueduct. Now where this cerebral aqueduct is located, so it is present between third ventricle and fourth ventricle, this one. So let's discuss about this cerebral aqueduct. So as we have seen in the figure, a narrow canal called the cerebral aqueduct, also known as mesencephalic aqueduct, and formerly it was known as aqueduct of Sylvius. So this narrow canal, cerebral aqueduct, passes through the midbrain. Through the midbrain, it is passing, and it is connecting with the third ventricle. Okay, with the sickle shape fourth ventricle. So what the role this cerebral aqueduct is playing? So it is connecting third ventricle with the sickle shape fourth ventricle. So in other words, we can say between the third ventricle and fourth ventricle the cerebral aqueduct is present. Okay, and the old names are also you can remember for cerebral aqueduct. So in the figure, cerebral aqueduct. Okay, now the eighth point. Now here in this figure, this is also showing the development of the brain. Okay, now the in this point, see fourth ventricle is located where the fourth ventricle is present. So fourth ventricle is located between the pons, medulla oblongata, and cerebellum. So in the figure, this one fourth ventricle. Okay, this one is the lateral view, this one is the anterior view. Okay, so fourth ventricle located between the pons, medulla oblongata, and cerebellum. Fourth ventricle opens to the subarachnoid space. And how this fourth ventricle opening into subarachnoid space? So it opens into subarachnoid space via single median aperture and pair, that means two lateral aperture. So fourth ventricle via single median aperture and two lateral aperture opens into subarachnoid space. So here lateral aperture is shown and this one is the median aperture. So now what are this aperture and what is subarachnoid space? So see, fourth ventricle once again lies in the hindbrain. In the hindbrain, fourth ventricle is present and it is located dorsal to the pons and superior medulla. Now fourth ventricle continues with the central canal of the spinal cord inferiorly. This is the fourth ventricle. Here central canal, and you can see that the fourth ventricle is continued with the central canal of the spinal cord. Now three openings mark the walls of the fourth ventricle. There are three openings. Paired lateral aperture that we have seen. Paired means two lateral aperture where they are present in its side walls. Then median aperture in the roof. Okay. Now what these apertures are doing? So this aperture, they connect the ventricle to the subarachnoid space. And what is the subarachnoid space? So subarachnoid space is a fluid filled space surrounding the brain. Okay, so this is the eighth and final point. So with this we have completed our discussion on ventricles of the brain. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation lecture on ventricles of the brain, and I also hope that this presentation lecture will be helpful in your exam preparation and also in your studies. My name is Manish Kochi sir. I am from Ahmedabad, India. Bye bye. Namaste.